Hello guys, how are you everyone? Today we will review and explain Mortal Kombat 2 full movie part by part. So let's start. Part 1. The Rise of Johnny Cage. Episode 1. The movie that could change video game cinema forever. Hollywood has failed video game movies for decades. Studios spent hundreds of millions trying to adapt legendary gaming franchises. And most of them collapsed under bad writing, weak action, forgettable villains, and stories that completely misunderstood the fans. But then, something changed. A bloody R-rated movie arrived in 2021 and shocked everyone. It wasn't perfect. Critics were divided. Fans argued endlessly online. But audiences loved one thing above everything else. It finally felt like Mortal Kombat. The brutal fatalities, the dark fantasy atmosphere, the iconic characters, the violence, the mythology. For the first time in years, fans believed this franchise might actually have a future. And now, that future is becoming much bigger. Because Mortal Kombat 2 is no longer trying to prove the franchise can survive. Now it's trying to become the biggest video game movie universe in Hollywood. This film is aiming for larger battles, larger characters, larger stakes, and one legendary addition that instantly changed fan excitement forever. Johnny Cage, played by Karl. But this sequel isn't just another tournament movie. Behind the trailers, casting reveals, production updates, and leaked details, there's a much bigger story happening. A story about Warner Brothers. The future of gaming adaptations, the pressure of fan expectations, and whether Mortal Kombat 2 can truly compete with giant franchises like Marvel, DC, and John Wick. Because if this movie succeeds, everything changes. And if it fails, the entire future of Mortal Kombat cinema could collapse with it. So today, we're diving deep into everything. The story, the cast, the budget, the production, the hidden details, the returning characters, the darker tone, the future sequel setup, the risks, the expectations, and why Mortal Kombat 2 might become the most important fighting game movie ever made. This is the full cinematic documentary breakdown of Mortal Kombat 2. Main intro. Before we talk about Mortal Kombat 2, we need to understand why this sequel exists in the first place. Because the journey toward this movie was chaotic from the beginning. For decades, Mortal Kombat remained one of the most iconic gaming franchises on Earth. Created by Ed Boon and John Tobias in the early 1990s, Mortal Kombat exploded globally because it was different from every fighting game before it. It wasn't colorful and safe. It was violent, dark, aggressive, controversial. The franchise became famous not just because of gameplay, but because of identity, fatalities, ninjas, monsters, gods, blood, ancient tournaments, interdimensional warfare. Every character looked iconic. Scorpion, Sub-Zero, Raiden, Liu Kang, Kitana, Johnny Cage. Even people who never played the games recognized those names. That level of brand power is extremely rare. And Hollywood noticed immediately. The original 1995 Mortal Kombat movie became a cult classic despite its flaws. Fans loved the energy, the soundtrack, the atmosphere. But over time, the franchise struggled in cinema. Sequels failed. Reboots disappeared. Studios lost direction. For years, Mortal Kombat survived mainly through the games themselves. And then Warner Brothers decided to try again. That decision changed everything. The 2021 Mortal Kombat reboot arrived with massive pressure surrounding it. Fans demanded authenticity. Studios demanded profit. Critics demanded quality. And audiences demanded spectacle. The film released simultaneously in theaters and on streaming during one of the strangest periods in Hollywood history. COVID had damaged theaters globally. Studios were panicking. Streaming wars were exploding. Nobody truly knew whether audiences would even support theatrical releases anymore. But despite all of that chaos, Mortal Kombat performed surprisingly well. Especially online. The film generated massive streaming numbers. Clips went viral everywhere. Fight scenes dominated YouTube. Fatalities flooded social media. And perhaps most importantly, fans started talking about the franchise again. That conversation alone guaranteed one thing: a sequel was coming. But Warner Brothers understood something important. The sequel needed to be bigger. Much bigger. Because the first film had one major criticism repeated constantly online. Where was Johnny Cage? That single question followed the movie everywhere. And honestly, fans had a point. Johnny Cage isn't just another fighter. He's one of the faces of Mortal Kombat itself. Removing him from the first movie felt strange to longtime fans. But secretly, that absence may have been the smartest decision possible. Because it created anticipation. Months after release, rumors exploded online regarding who would play Johnny Cage in the sequel. Fans suggested huge names: Ryan Reynolds, The Miz, Chris Pratt, Scott Adkins, even WWE stars were rumored. But eventually, Warner Brothers made their decision. Karl Urban. And the internet exploded. Because Karl Urban wasn't the obvious choice. But sometimes the unexpected choice becomes the best choice. Karl Urban carries something most action actors don't: presence. He feels believable in violent worlds. Whether in The Boys, Dredd, Star Trek, or Lord of the Rings, Urban understands gritty characters, broken characters, sarcastic characters, dangerous characters. And suddenly fans realized something important. This version of Johnny Cage might not simply be comic relief. He might become the emotional core of the entire movie. That changes everything. Because Mortal Kombat II appears far darker than many people expected. The first movie introduced the universe. The sequel appears ready to expand it into full-scale war. And to understand how serious Warner Brothers is about this film, we need to talk about money. Budget. Because budget reveals studio confidence better than trailers ever can. While official numbers remain partially undisclosed, industry estimates suggest Mortal Kombat II received a noticeably larger production budget than the 2021 film. Episode 2. The Villain Who Could Destroy Earthrealm Forever. In every great story, there comes a moment when the real monster finally arrives. Not the servant, not the messenger, not the warning, the monster. And in the world of Mortal Kombat, that monster has always been Shao Kahn. For years, fans waited to see him return properly to live action. Not as a weak adaptation, not as a forgettable villain, but as the nightmare he was always meant to be. A conqueror of worlds, a destroyer of civilizations, a ruler so terrifying that even gods fear his existence. And now, Mortal Kombat II is finally bringing him to the big screen again. But this isn't just another villain introduction. This character could decide whether Mortal Kombat II becomes legendary or collapses under fan expectations completely. Because Shao Kahn isn't merely important to the franchise. He is the franchise's greatest threat, the Emperor of Outworld, the ruler of death, the monster behind generations of suffering. And according to everything we know so far, this movie is about to unleash the darkest version of him ever created. Today, we're diving deep into everything: the hidden meaning behind Shao Kahn, the lore, the casting, the design, the leaked story details, the budget behind the character, the connection to Kitana, the invasion of Earthrealm, the war against Raiden, the psychology of power, the possible fatalities, the future sequel setup, and why Mortal Kombat 2 may secretly be building towards something much larger than fans realize. Because this isn't simply a tournament anymore. This is the beginning of war. Main intro. To understand why Shao Kahn matters so much, we first need to understand Mortal Kombat itself. Because Mortal Kombat was never just about fighting. That's the biggest misunderstanding outsiders make about this franchise. People see violence, blood, fatalities, but beneath all that brutality lies something much deeper. A mythology built around fear, power, destiny, and survival. Every realm in Mortal Kombat exists in constant danger of conquest. Entire worlds can disappear forever. Civilizations can be erased. History can be consumed by stronger forces. And standing above all those horrors is Shao Kahn, the Emperor of Outworld. For decades, Shao Kahn represented ultimate domination inside the games. Not merely another villain. The villain. The final nightmare waiting at the end of every journey. A ruler whose presence alone changes entire realities. And that's exactly why fans were nervous when Mortal Kombat 2 announced his arrival. Because adapting Shao Kahn correctly is incredibly difficult. If he feels weak, the movie fails. If he feels cartoonish, the audience disconnects. If he lacks intimidation, the entire invasion storyline collapses instantly. This character must feel overwhelming, like death itself entering the room. And honestly, Warner Brothers may have understood that perfectly. Because the moment Martyn was cast, fans immediately realized something important. This version of Shao Kahn is being built around physical terror. Martyn doesn't look human. He looks engineered in a laboratory to intimidate people. Gigantic frame, massive muscle structure, towering height, and perhaps most importantly, presence. That matters more than acting skill in a character like Shao Kahn. Because before Shao Kahn even speaks, audiences must feel uncomfortable. The Emperor should dominate scenes visually before he dominates them emotionally. And based on early reactions from production details, that appears to be exactly what Mortal Kombat 2 is attempting. But physical appearance alone isn't enough. The real challenge is psychological storytelling. Because the best villains don't simply destroy bodies. They destroy hope. And Shao Kahn has always represented hopelessness. Think about it. Most villains want revenge, money, chaos, political power. But Shao Kahn wants ownership. Ownership of realms. Ownership of lives. Ownership of existence itself. He doesn't merely defeat enemies. He consumes worlds. That level of ambition transforms him into something far more terrifying than ordinary antagonists. And Mortal Kombat 2 reportedly leans heavily into that horror. This isn't a villain planning a robbery. This is an emperor planning extinction. Now let's talk about something fascinating regarding the film's direction. The first Mortal Kombat movie introduced audiences to Shang Tsung as the primary threat. And Shang Tsung worked because he represented manipulation. He was strategic, patient, deceptive. But Shao Kahn is completely different. He doesn't manipulate fear. He embodies it. And that contrast could make Mortal Kombat 2 feel dramatically larger than the first film immediately. Because once Shao Kahn enters the story, everything escalates. The scale, the danger, the emotional stakes, the mythology, the violence, everything. This is no longer about isolated fights between warriors. this becomes a war for reality itself. And according to story information currently available, that war begins shortly after the events of the 2021 film. Earthrealm survived Shang Tsung's attack. But survival came with consequences. Outworld now sees Earth as vulnerable, weak, divided, and Shao Kahn interprets that weakness as opportunity. That setup is extremely smart because it removes repetitive storytelling. Instead of another tournament structure, Mortal Kombat II reportedly shifts toward invasion narrative territory. That means larger battles, destroyed environments, more character interactions, and far greater cinematic scale. Which brings us to another major topic: budget. Because making Shao Kahn believable on screen requires enormous production resources. Costume design alone becomes complicated. The armor must feel ancient, heavy, royal, brutal. It cannot resemble cheap cosplay. And thankfully, modern filmmaking technology gives Warner Bros. Far more creative freedom than older Mortal Kombat adaptations ever had. Advanced CGI enhancement, motion capture refinement, improved practical makeup integration, digital environment expansion. All of these tools help bring Outworld to life properly. And Outworld itself may become one of the film's most important characters, because the environment surrounding Shao Kahn matters enormously. Outworld should not feel like generic Fantasyland. It should feel oppressive, ancient, violent, a civilization built through conquest. Everything inside it should reflect centuries of war. Architecture, weapons, armor, creatures, even lighting choices matter. Episode 3: The Most Dangerous Woman in Outworld. In every war, there is always one person trapped between two worlds, not fully loyal to either side, not fully trusted by anyone, a soul divided between duty and truth. And inside the brutal universe of Mortal Kombat, that person is Kitana, a princess raised inside an empire built on death, a warrior trained by monsters, a daughter surrounded by lies. For years, fans knew Kitana as one of the most iconic characters in gaming history. The blue outfit, the steel fans, the elegance, the deadly precision. But behind all of that style, there has always been tragedy, because Kitana was never truly free. Not from Shao Kahn, not from Outworld, not even from her own identity. And now, Mortal Kombat II is finally bringing her into live action again. But this version appears very different from previous adaptations. Darker, more emotional, more psychologically broken. And according to everything we know so far, Kitana may secretly become the emotional heart of the entire movie. Not Johnny Cage, not Liu Kang, not Raiden. Kitana. Because while others fight to save Earthrealm, Kitana is fighting to reclaim her soul. Today, we're diving deep into everything: the casting, the lore, the hidden tragedy of Outworld, the connection to Shao Kahn, the relationship with Liu Kang, the betrayal theories, the emotional symbolism behind the character, the future sequel setup, the costume design, the combat style, the possible storyline, and why Kitana might become the most important character in the future of Mortal Kombat cinema. Because sometimes, the most dangerous warriors are not the loudest ones. Sometimes, they are the ones who suffered in silence for years. Main intro. Before we talk about Mortal Kombat II, we need to understand why Kitana matters so much to the franchise itself. Because Kitana is not simply another fighter added for fan service. She represents something much deeper. Humanity inside darkness, hope inside corruption, a conscience trapped inside an empire of violence. And that's exactly why fans were so desperate to see her introduced properly into the rebooted universe. For decades, Kitana remained one of Mortal Kombat's most beloved characters, not only because of design, not only because of gameplay, but because her story carried emotional depth. Most fighters in Mortal Kombat choose battle willingly. Kitana never truly had that choice. She was raised inside Outworld, a realm ruled by fear, a dimension built through conquest, slavery, death, and endless war. And standing above all of it was Shao Kahn, the Emperor, the man she believed was family. That psychological detail changes everything about her character, because Kitana's story has always been about manipulation, about discovering that the world you trusted was built on lies. And honestly, that theme feels incredibly powerful today, which is exactly why Mortal Kombat II could surprise audiences emotionally if it handles her correctly. Now let's talk about the casting choice. Because when Adeline Rudolph was announced as Kitana, fan reactions exploded immediately online. Some people celebrated, some doubted the choice, others simply became curious. But the more fans studied the casting, the more the decision started making sense. Because Kitana requires a very specific balance that most actresses cannot deliver. She must feel elegant, without feeling weak, dangerous, without losing emotional vulnerability, royal, without becoming emotionally distant. That combination is extremely difficult. And according to early production reactions, Mortal Kombat II is leaning heavily into the emotional side of the character, which may be the smartest decision possible. Because action alone cannot make Kitana memorable. Emotion can. The audience must understand her pain, her confusion, her loneliness. Without that emotional foundation, she becomes visually iconic but emotionally empty. And Mortal Kombat II reportedly wants far more than surface-level fan service. This film appears determined to expand the mythology emotionally, especially regarding Outworld itself. Because one fascinating thing about Kitana is that she allows audiences to finally see the human consequences of Shao Kahn's empire. Up until now, Outworld mostly existed as a threatening concept, a dark dimension filled with monsters. But Kitana changes that perspective completely. Through her eyes, Outworld becomes tragic, oppressive, broken, a civilization surviving beneath fear. That world-building matters enormously because believable universes require emotional perspective. Without characters like Kitana, Outworld risks feeling like generic fantasy evil. But through her story, the Empire gains emotional texture. Now here's where things become psychologically fascinating. Kitana was raised by Shao Kahn. Think about that carefully. Imagine growing up beside one of the most terrifying conquerors in existence. A man obsessed with domination. A ruler who destroys entire civilizations. What kind of emotional damage would that create? That's where Mortal Kombat II has incredible storytelling potential. Because Kitana likely spent her entire life learning survival through obedience. Every word controlled. Every emotion hidden. Every thought monitored. That creates a person constantly trapped between fear and duty. And honestly, that internal conflict may become one of the most mature aspects of the entire movie. Especially if the screenplay fully embraces psychological manipulation rather than simple rebellion storytelling. Great emotional writing understands one important truth. Victims of manipulation often defend the people hurting them. Not because they're weak, because they're conditioned. And Shao Kahn almost certainly shaped Kitana's understanding of reality from childhood. That relationship should feel terrifying emotionally. Not physically, psychologically. Now let's talk about the visual side of the character. because Kitana's design is legendary among gaming fans. The blue aesthetic, the steel fans, the assassin princess identity. Everything about her visual presence feels iconic. And adapting that design into live action requires balance. Too comic accurate can feel unrealistic. Too grounded can disappoint fans. The first Mortal Kombat movie already struggled with balancing realism and game-inspired visuals occasionally. But Mortal Kombat II reportedly expands the fantasy elements much more aggressively. Episode 4. The blood feud that created Mortal Kombat. Before Shao Kahn. Before tournaments. Before Earthrealm stood on the edge of destruction, there were two warriors. Two names feared across every realm. Scorpion. Sub-Zero. One consumed by vengeance. The other trapped inside darkness. For decades, this rivalry defined Mortal Kombat itself. Not because of flashy powers, not because of fatalities, but because beneath the violence, there was tragedy. A family destroyed, a clan erased, a soul dragged into hell. And now, Mortal Kombat II is preparing to continue that war on a scale fans have waited years to see. But this time, the conflict is no longer just personal. Because the battle between Scorpion and Sub-Zero may secretly decide the fate of Earthrealm itself. Today, we're diving deep into everything: the history, the emotional symbolism, the hidden lore, the psychology behind both warriors, the future of Bi-Han, the possible return of Noob Saibot, the production details, the action choreography, the cast performances, the darker tone of the sequel, the budget expansion, theories surrounding the storyline, and why Mortal Kombat II could finally deliver the definitive live-action version of gaming's most iconic rivalry. Because this was never simply a fight. This was a curse passed through blood. Main intro. When people think about Mortal Kombat, most characters immediately come to mind. Raiden, Liu Kang, Johnny Cage, Kitana. But only two truly became symbols of the franchise itself. Scorpion and Sub-Zero. The yellow ninja, the blue ninja. Two opposites connected forever through hatred. Even people who never played the games recognize them instantly. That level of cultural impact is incredibly rare in gaming. And honestly, Hollywood understood that from the beginning. Every Mortal Kombat adaptation always revolves around these two warriors somehow. Because without them, the emotional soul of the franchise feels incomplete. The 2021 Mortal Kombat reboot understood this perfectly. That's why the film opened not with tournaments, not with Raiden, not with Earthrealm politics, but with Hanzo Hasashi, Scorpion, and that opening sequence immediately became the emotional heart of the movie. Hiroyuki Sanada delivered something far deeper than audiences expected. Pain, loss, humanity. Instead of portraying Scorpion as just another supernatural fighter, the film portrayed him as a broken man destroyed by grief. That decision changed everything, because suddenly, Scorpion wasn't just cool. He was tragic. And tragedy always creates stronger storytelling than spectacle alone. Now Mortal Kombat II appears ready to expand that emotional darkness even further, especially regarding the continued evolution of Sub-Zero. Or more specifically, Bi-Han. Because one fascinating thing about the Mortal Kombat mythology is that Sub-Zero was never purely evil. That's what makes the rivalry compelling. Bi-Han is a killer. Cold, efficient, merciless. But beneath that icy exterior lies something more complicated. Manipulation, control. A warrior shaped into a weapon. And according to fan theories surrounding Mortal Kombat II, the sequel may finally begin transforming Bi-Han into something even darker. Noob Saibot. Now for longtime fans, that name carries enormous importance. Noob Saibot isn't merely another costume change. He represents corruption after death, a soul consumed entirely by darkness. If the sequel moves in that direction, the emotional intensity of the Scorpion storyline could increase dramatically, because Hanzo's greatest enemy would no longer remain human at all. He would become something worse, a living shadow. And honestly, that transformation could become one of the film's most visually terrifying elements. But before we talk about the future, we need to understand why this rivalry emotionally matters so much. Because beneath the powers and violence, Scorpion and Sub-Zero represent two different responses to suffering. Scorpion responds with rage. Sub-Zero responds with emotional detachment. One burns with emotion. The other freezes emotionally. That symbolic contrast is genius storytelling. Fire versus ice isn't just visual design. It reflects personality, identity, philosophy. And Mortal Kombat II reportedly leans heavily into psychological themes again. Fear, pain, identity, corruption. These ideas repeatedly appear throughout production discussions, which makes Scorpion and Sub-Zero perfect emotional centerpieces for the story. Now let's talk about Hiroyuki Sanada. Because honestly, his casting may have saved the emotional credibility of the franchise entirely. Sanada carries legendary screen presence, but more importantly, he carries sadness extremely well. Every scene involving Hanzo in the first movie felt emotionally haunted. Even before becoming Scorpion, audiences understood immediately. This man was doomed. That emotional inevitability made his transformation horrifying rather than merely exciting. And Mortal Kombat II reportedly explores the consequences of that transformation much deeper. Because becoming Scorpion was not a victory. It was damnation. Hanzo returned from hell fueled entirely by vengeance. But what happens after revenge? That question may define his storyline in the sequel, especially if Bi-Han evolves further into darkness. Now let's discuss Joe Taslim. Because his portrayal of Sub-Zero became one of the most praised aspects of the 2021 film instantly. Why? Presence. Every movement felt lethal, controlled, precise. Unlike many modern action villains who rely on noise and chaos, Taslim's Sub-Zero felt calm, which made him terrifying. Real predators rarely scream during violence, and that realism elevated the character enormously. Now imagine that same physical performance enhanced through darker supernatural evolution. That possibility alone excites longtime fans tremendously, especially regarding visual effects, because Mortal Kombat II reportedly received a larger production budget than the first movie. And honestly, that increase was necessary. The first film succeeded despite limitations. Some CGI moments felt unfinished. Certain environments lacked scale. But the sequel appears far more ambitious visually. Bigger battles, larger mythology, expanded realm designs, more practical effects, and most importantly, more supernatural horror. That last point matters enormously for Scorpion and Sub-Zero specifically, because their rivalry works best when it feels mythological rather than merely physical. These are not ordinary fighters. They are cursed souls carrying generations of hatred. Episode 5: The Actor Who Becomes Earthrealm's Last Hope. Hollywood created Johnny Cage, but Mortal Kombat will destroy him. For years, audiences laughed at Johnny Cage, a fake martial artist, a celebrity obsessed with fame, a man hiding behind sunglasses, expensive smiles, and action movies designed to make him look stronger than he really was. But in Mortal Kombat II, everything changes, because this time, Johnny Cage is no longer fighting on movie sets. No stunt doubles, no scripted victories, no cameras protecting him. Now he's standing in the middle of a real war. A war against monsters, gods, and an emperor capable of destroying entire worlds. And the most terrifying part? Johnny Cage may be completely unprepared for it. Today, we're diving deep into everything surrounding Johnny Cage in Mortal Kombat II. The casting controversy, Karl Urban's version of the character, the hidden emotional depth behind Johnny Cage, the production secrets, the budget expansion, the connection to Earthrealm, the possible future storyline, the fan expectations, the action choreography, the emotional symbolism, and why Johnny Cage could secretly become the most important character in the entire Mortal Kombat cinematic universe. Because sometimes, the people pretending to be heroes their whole lives become real heroes when the world finally collapses. Main intro. When the 2021 Mortal Kombat reboot released, fans immediately noticed something strange. Johnny Cage was missing. For casual audiences, that might not sound important, but longtime Mortal Kombat fans understood instantly how massive that absence really was. Johnny Cage isn't just another fighter. He's one of the faces of the franchise itself. Alongside Scorpion and Sub-Zero, Johnny became one of Mortal Kombat's most recognizable characters across gaming history. Funny, arrogant, entertaining, but also surprisingly important. And that's why fans spent months asking one question repeatedly. Where is Johnny Cage? At first, many people thought Warner Bros. Simply removed him from the reboot entirely. But the ending teaser confirmed something much bigger. Johnny Cage was being saved for the sequel. And honestly, that may have been the smartest decision possible. Because Mortal Kombat 2 now has the opportunity to introduce Johnny properly instead of forcing him into an already crowded origin story. And according to everything we know so far, this version of Johnny Cage will be very different from previous live-action adaptations. Darker, older, more emotionally broken. And that change may completely redefine the character for modern audiences. Now let's talk about the casting choice. Because when Karl Urban was officially announced as Johnny Cage, the internet exploded instantly. Some fans loved it, Others hated it. Many were confused. Because Karl Urban wasn't the obvious choice. He didn't resemble the classic younger versions from the games directly. But then people started thinking deeper about the character. And suddenly, the casting began making perfect sense. Because Karl Urban carries something extremely important: weariness. He looks like someone who survived failure. And that emotional texture matters enormously for this version of Johnny Cage. Why? Because Mortal Kombat II reportedly portrays Johnny as a fading Hollywood action star. Not a man at the top of his career. A man desperately trying to stay relevant. That's fascinating storytelling. Instead of introducing Johnny as instantly cool and confident, the movie appears ready to explore insecurity beneath the arrogance. And honestly, that's exactly what modern audiences connect with most. Flawed heroes. Not perfect ones. Now imagine this scenario. Johnny Cage standing on a cheap movie set. Fake explosions surrounding him. Crew members barely respecting him anymore. Studios no longer believing in him. Fans moving on to younger stars. That emotional setup instantly humanizes the character. Because beneath the ego, Johnny is terrified. Terrified of becoming irrelevant. Terrified of fading away. Terrified that maybe he was never truly special at all. And then suddenly, Raiden enters his life. That's where the story changes completely. Because Johnny spent years pretending to fight monsters on screen. Now he must face real ones. And that psychological transition could become one of the strongest emotional arcs in the entire movie. Now let's discuss why Johnny Cage matters so much thematically. Most Mortal Kombat characters already belong to mythology. Liu Kang understands destiny. Raiden understands cosmic balance. Scorpion understands supernatural suffering. But Johnny represents ordinary humanity. Not physically ordinary, obviously, but emotionally ordinary. He reacts the way most real people would react when confronted with gods and monsters. Shock, disbelief, fear, humor masking panic. That perspective makes him incredibly important for audience connection, especially inside a story becoming increasingly mythological and dark. Because without grounded emotional reactions, fantasy worlds risk becoming emotionally distant. Johnny solves that problem naturally. Now here's where things become psychologically interesting. Johnny Cage spent his life pretending to be fearless. Actors survive through illusion. Confidence becomes performance. Charm becomes survival. But what happens when performance no longer works? What happens when fake bravery collides with real terror? That question may define Johnny's storyline in Mortal Kombat II. And honestly, Karl Urban is perfect for that type of emotional material. Throughout his career, Urban consistently excels at portraying damaged men hiding pain beneath sarcasm. We saw it in Dread. We saw it in The Boys. And Mortal Kombat II appears ready to use that emotional energy fully. Now let's talk about the tone of the sequel. Because one fascinating thing about Johnny Cage is how he changes the atmosphere of every scene he enters. Mortal Kombat is dark, violent, heavy. Without balance, the movie risks becoming emotionally exhausting. Johnny provides contrast, humor, energy, personality. But here's the important part. The humor only works if emotional stakes remain real. And according to production details, Mortal Kombat II understands that balance much better than many fans expected. Johnny isn't there simply for jokes. He's there to evolve emotionally. That's a massive difference. Now let's discuss the action side of the character. Because obviously, this is still Mortal Kombat. Fighting matters enormously. Episode 6. the war that could destroy humanity forever. For centuries, Earthrealm survived because of rules. Ancient rules, sacred tournaments, agreements created by gods to stop total destruction between worlds. But now, those rules are breaking, and once the rules disappear, war begins. Not a small war, not a battle between fighters, a war between realms. Humanity versus Outworld, civilization versus conquest, hope versus fear. And standing above all of it is Shao Kahn, a ruler who has spent generations destroying entire worlds and absorbing them into his empire. Now Earth is next. Mortal Kombat II is no longer just a martial arts fantasy movie. According to everything we know so far, this sequel is transforming into a full-scale apocalyptic war film. Bigger battles, bigger destruction, bigger emotional stakes, and a darker atmosphere than anything the franchise has attempted before in live action. Today, we're diving deep into everything surrounding the Earthrealm versus Outworld storyline, the hidden lore, the invasion theories, the role of Shao Kahn, the expanded budget, the production scale, the returning fighters, the emotional symbolism behind the war, the future cinematic universe setup, the action choreography, the possible fatalities, the connection to the games, and why Mortal Kombat II may secretly become the darkest video game movie Hollywood has made in years. Because this time, Earthrealm isn't fighting for victory. It's fighting for survival. Main intro. When the 2021 Mortal Kombat reboot released, many fans enjoyed the violence, characters, and action. But one criticism appeared repeatedly online. The movie felt like setup, not the real event. And honestly, those fans were right. The first film existed mainly to introduce the universe. Scorpion, Sub-Zero, Raiden, Liu Kang, Shang Tsung, the dragon markings, the prophecy, everything served as foundation for something larger. Mortal Kombat II appears to be that larger story, because now the franchise can finally stop introducing the world and start destroying it. And according to production details and casting reveals, this sequel is going far beyond tournament storytelling. It's moving toward invasion. That changes everything about the tone instantly. Tournaments create structure. War creates chaos. And chaos may define Mortal Kombat II completely. Now let's talk about why the Earthrealm versus Outworld storyline matters so much to the franchise itself. In Mortal Kombat lore, Earthrealm survives because realms cannot simply invade each other freely. They must win Mortal Kombat tournaments first. That rule prevents total destruction. But villains like Shao Kahn constantly search for ways around those restrictions. Because Shao Kahn doesn't want competition. He wants domination. That's what makes him terrifying. Unlike Shang Tsung, who manipulates people strategically, Shao Kahn overwhelms entire civilizations through force. He destroys worlds, consumes cultures, turns kingdoms into property. And now, Mortal Kombat II is finally bringing that nightmare into live action properly. Now let's discuss the casting of Martyn as Shao Kahn. Because honestly, this decision tells audiences exactly what kind of villain Warner Bros. Wants. Massive, intimidating, monstrous. Martyn looks less like a normal human actor and more like a creature engineered for fantasy warfare. That physicality matters enormously. Shao Kahn must dominate every room visually before he even speaks. And according to early production reactions, the sequel leans heavily into practical armor design and physical presence instead of relying entirely on CGI. That's a smart choice. Modern audiences appreciate tangible villains more than digital-looking ones, especially in darker fantasy storytelling. Now imagine Shao Kahn standing inside Outworld surrounded by ruined civilizations conquered over centuries. That visual alone communicates scale. Because Outworld itself is one of the most important aspects of the movie. The first film only hinted at its existence briefly, but Mortal Kombat II reportedly expands the realm dramatically. And honestly, that expansion is necessary. Outworld should not feel like generic Fantasyland. It should feel ancient, cruel, oppressive, a civilization built through endless conquest. Every environment should reflect violence, dark skies, massive statues, burned ruins, slave armies, gigantic war structures. Everything should feel emotionally heavy, because the environment itself tells the audience who Shao Kahn is. Now here's something fascinating about the Earthrealm versus Outworld conflict. It isn't just physical, it's philosophical. Earthrealm represents freedom, individuality, humanity. Outworld represents control, fear, submission. That thematic contrast gives the war emotional meaning beyond action scenes. And honestly, that emotional layer is exactly what modern blockbuster storytelling needs. Spectacle alone isn't enough anymore. Audiences want themes, psychology, symbolism, and Mortal Kombat II appears more interested in emotional depth than many people expected. Now let's talk about Raiden. Because one of the most interesting aspects of the sequel may involve Raiden realizing Earthrealm is no longer prepared for what's coming. The first film portrayed him as calm and controlled. But Shao Kahn changes everything. This isn't simply another tournament. This is extinction-level danger. That shift reportedly creates darker emotional tension among Earthrealm's defenders. Fear spreads, confidence weakens, and suddenly, victory no longer feels guaranteed. That atmosphere matters enormously, because audiences emotionally invest more when defeat feels possible. Now let's discuss Johnny Cage's role in this war. Because Johnny may become the emotional lens through which audiences experience the invasion. Unlike Liu Kang or Sonya, Johnny begins as an outsider, a celebrity thrown into mythological conflict. That perspective makes him relatable. He reacts like ordinary people would react. Shock, disbelief, panic hidden behind humor. And according to storyline theories, Johnny gradually realizes the world is genuinely ending. Not metaphorically, literally. That emotional realization could become one of the sequel's strongest character arcs. Now let's talk about Liu Kang. Part 7. The Dark Future of Mortal Kombat. Something dangerous is happening inside Hollywood. Video game movies are no longer jokes. For years, studios treated gaming adaptations like easy money. Cheap fan service, weak scripts, forgettable action, and audiences suffered through disaster after disaster. But now, everything is changing. The Last of Us shocked television. Fallout became a massive streaming success. Super Mario Bros. Dominated the box office. And suddenly, Hollywood realized something terrifying. Gaming franchises may become the future of entertainment itself. That's exactly why Mortal Kombat 2 matters far more than people think. Because this movie is not just another sequel. It's a test. A test for Warner Brothers. A test for R-rated fantasy cinema. A test for whether Mortal Kombat can finally evolve into a true cinematic universe after decades of failed attempts. And according to everything we know so far, this sequel is aiming much bigger than the first movie ever did. Bigger mythology, bigger emotional storytelling, bigger battles, bigger risks, but also much darker consequences. Today, we're diving deep into everything surrounding the future of Mortal Kombat 2. The production scale, the budget increase, the hidden Warner Brothers strategy, the connection to future sequels, the possibility of spin-offs, the cast expansion, the risks of failure, the pressure from fans, the darker tone, the future of gaming movies, and why Mortal Kombat II may secretly become one of the most important video game adaptations of this decade. Because if this movie succeeds, the franchise changes forever. Main intro. To understand why Mortal Kombat II carries so much pressure, we first need to understand what happened to the franchise before the reboot. For decades, Mortal Kombat survived mostly through the games. The gaming side of the franchise remained strong, but live-action adaptations struggled repeatedly. The 1995 movie became a cult classic despite its flaws. Fans loved the music, the atmosphere, the nostalgia. But over time, Hollywood failed to modernize Mortal Kombat successfully. Sequels collapsed. Projects disappeared. Studios lost direction. And eventually, many fans stopped believing Mortal Kombat could ever work properly in live action again. Then Warner Brothers tried something different. Instead of making a safe PG-13 blockbuster, they embraced the brutality, blood, fatalities, dark fantasy, R-rated violence. That decision changed everything. The 2021 reboot wasn't perfect. Not even close. Fans criticized the pacing, the story structure, certain CGI moments, the absence of Johnny Cage. But despite those problems, the movie succeeded in one extremely important area. It made people care about Mortal Kombat again. Clips went viral online constantly. Scorpion vs. Sub-Zero became one of the most talked-about gaming movie fights in years. The streaming numbers performed strongly, and Warner Brothers realized something immediately. This franchise still has massive potential. That's why Mortal Kombat II exists. But sequels always face a bigger challenge than reboots. The first movie earns curiosity. The sequel must earn trust. And honestly, Warner Brothers appears fully aware of that pressure. Everything surrounding Mortal Kombat II feels more ambitious, more confident, more expensive, and much larger in scale. Now let's talk about budget. Because budget reveals studio confidence better than trailers ever can. While official numbers remain partially undisclosed, industry discussions strongly suggest Mortal Kombat II received noticeably larger financial support than the first film. And honestly, that increase was necessary. The sequel demands expansion in every direction. More characters, more realms, more visual effects, larger action sequences, better creature designs, more environmental destruction, and most importantly, a believable cinematic scale. The first movie occasionally felt visually limited. Certain environments lacked grandeur. Some effects felt unfinished. But Mortal Kombat II reportedly aims to fix those weaknesses directly. Now imagine what that means visually. Outworld fully realized. Massive war sequences. Larger practical sets, improved costume design, better supernatural effects for Scorpion and Sub-Zero, and perhaps most importantly, Shao Kahn himself, because Shao Kahn represents one of the biggest challenges in the franchise. If the villain fails, the movie fails. Simple as that. And casting Martyn immediately signaled Warner Brothers wanted physical intimidation above everything else. This version of Shao Kahn looks monstrous, towering, unnatural. Exactly how fans imagined the Emperor should feel. That physicality matters enormously because Mortal Kombat II reportedly shifts from tournament storytelling toward invasion storytelling. This is no longer merely about winning fights. This is about surviving war. And war changes the tone of everything. Now let's discuss something fascinating regarding modern audiences. People are increasingly tired of safe blockbuster movies. Too many modern films feel emotionally identical. Predictable jokes, predictable endings, predictable action. But Mortal Kombat has one major advantage. It thrives inside darkness, pain, violence, fear, mythology. Now we explain Part 8, The Rise of Kitana and Jade. In Outworld, trust does not exist. Power decides everything. Mercy becomes weakness, and loyalty can disappear with a single command from the Emperor. But even inside a realm built on fear, two warriors survived together. Kitana and Jade, friends raised inside darkness. Assassins trained beneath Shao Kahn's empire. Women forced to become weapons long before they truly understood the meaning of war. And now, Mortal Kombat II is finally bringing both characters into the live-action universe together. But according to everything we know so far, their story may become far darker than fans expect. Because this isn't simply a friendship. It's a survival bond created inside one of the cruelest empires in Mortal Kombat history. Today, we're diving deep into everything surrounding Kitana and Jade in Mortal Kombat II. The casting choices, the hidden lore, the emotional connection between the characters, the role of Shao Kahn, the future betrayal theories, the outworld politics, the expanded budget, the combat styles, the visual designs, the future cinematic universe setup, and why Kitana and Jade may secretly become the emotional backbone of the entire Mortal Kombat franchise moving forward. Because sometimes, the strongest warriors are not the ones who seek power. They are the ones trying to survive it. Main intro. When Warner Brothers officially announced Kitana and Jade for Mortal Kombat II, fans immediately understood something important. The sequel was becoming much bigger than the first movie. Because introducing these two characters changes the emotional and political structure of the franchise completely. The first Mortal Kombat movie focused mostly on Earthrealm fighters. Liu Kang, Sonya, Jax, Scorpion, Sub-Zero. The audience mainly experienced the story from humanity's perspective. But Kitana and Jade changed that. For the first time, the franchise can fully explore life inside Outworld itself. And honestly, that may become one of the sequel's biggest strengths. Because Outworld should never feel like generic evil fantasyland. It should feel like a real civilization. Cruel, violent, corrupted, but still emotionally alive. And Kitana and Jade provide the perfect emotional lens for audiences to experience that world. Now let's talk about Kitana first. Because Kitana has always been one of Mortal Kombat's most iconic characters. The blue costume, the steel fans, the elegance mixed with deadly precision. But beneath the visual style, there's tragedy. Real tragedy. Kitana grew up inside Shao Kahn's empire believing lies, believing loyalty mattered, believing obedience ensured survival. That emotional manipulation defines her entire identity. And according to everything currently known about Mortal Kombat II, the movie leans heavily into that psychological darkness, which is excellent news. because Kitana should never feel emotionally shallow. She's not simply the princess character. She represents someone slowly discovering the world around her was built through fear and genocide. That's powerful storytelling. Now let's discuss Jade. Because Jade's introduction may surprise many casual audiences. Unlike Kitana, Jade is often quieter emotionally, more controlled, more mysterious. But that calm personality hides enormous complexity. Jade exists in a dangerous position inside Mortal Kombat lore. She is loyal to Kitana, but raised by the same empire, meaning every decision she makes carries risk. And honestly, that emotional tension could become one of the sequel's strongest story elements, especially if the movie explores the fear of betrayal realistically. Now let's talk about the casting choices. Because casting matters enormously for characters this beloved. Adeline Rudolph as Kitana immediately generated huge online discussion. Fans debated whether she could capture the elegance, danger, and emotional vulnerability required for the role. Meanwhile, Tati Gabrielle's casting as Jade created excitement because of her natural intensity and screen presence. And honestly, both casting choices suggest Warner Bros. Wants emotionally grounded versions of these characters instead of purely stylized fan service portrayals. That's important, because modern audiences demand emotional realism from fantasy characters now. Especially female action characters. People want depth, motivation, psychological complexity. And Mortal Kombat II reportedly understands that much better than previous adaptations. Now let's discuss the emotional relationship between Kitana and Jade, because their bond may secretly become one of the most human elements in the entire movie. Imagine growing up inside Outworld, an empire ruled through intimidation, surrounded by violence constantly. In that environment, friendship becomes survival, trust becomes rare, and that shared emotional history could make their scenes incredibly powerful, especially compared to the chaos happening around them. Now here's where things become psychologically fascinating. What happens when two people raised inside the same darkness begin evolving differently? Kitana reportedly begins questioning Outworld more openly throughout the story. But Jade? Jade may initially remain more cautious, more conflicted. That difference creates emotional tension naturally, because leaving fear behind is never easy, especially when fear shaped your entire life. And honestly, that theme feels surprisingly mature for a Mortal Kombat movie. Now let's discuss Shao Kahn's role in their storyline. Because Shao Kahn isn't simply a villain to these characters. He's authority, power, control, possibly even a twisted parental figure emotionally. That relationship changes everything, especially regarding Kitana. Imagine discovering the man who raised you built his empire through endless conquest and death. That realization would destroy someone psychologically. And according to storyline theories, Mortal Kombat II may push heavily into emotional manipulation and loyalty conflicts surrounding Shao Kahn's empire. That's smart storytelling, because emotional fear often feels more terrifying than physical violence. Now let's talk about visual design. Because Kitana and Jade possess some of the most recognizable aesthetics in gaming history. Fans care deeply about these costumes, weapons, colors, fighting styles, everything. And adapting those designs correctly is extremely important. Too realistic, and fans become disappointed. Too comic accurate, and the movie risks looking artificial. Episode 9. The Monster Who Conquered Worlds. Some villains want money. Some want revenge. Some want power. But Shao Kahn wants something far more terrifying. Submission. He does not simply destroy worlds. He breaks them emotionally first. Entire civilizations forced to kneel before him. Kingdoms erased from history. Warriors turned into slaves. And now, Earthrealm stands next in line. For decades, Shao Kahn remained one of the most feared names in gaming history. Not because he was complicated, not because he was misunderstood, but because he represented unstoppable domination. A walking nightmare wearing armor. And now, Mortal Kombat 2 is finally bringing the Emperor into live action properly. Bigger, darker, more brutal than ever before. Today, we're diving deep into everything surrounding Shao Kahn in Mortal Kombat 2. The casting choice, the hidden psychology behind the character, the lore, the invasion storyline, the connection to Outworld, the visual design, the budget expansion, the action sequences, the future sequel setup, the emotional symbolism, and why Shao Kahn may become one of the most intimidating video game villains Hollywood has seen in years. Because this isn't just another enemy. This is the end of worlds. Main intro. When people discuss iconic Mortal Kombat villains, one name always dominates the conversation. Shao Kahn. Not Shang Tsung. Not Quan Chi. Not even Shinnok. Shao Kahn stands above all of them because he represents pure conquest. He doesn't manipulate from shadows constantly. He invades openly. And that difference matters. Shang Tsung feels dangerous because he's deceptive. Shao Kahn feels terrifying because he doesn't need deception at all. He believes nobody can stop him. That confidence defines the character completely. And according to everything we know about Mortal Kombat 2, the sequel fully embraces that terrifying energy. Now let's talk about the casting first. Because casting Shao Kahn correctly is incredibly important. If the Emperor lacks physical presence, the entire movie loses weight instantly. That's why Warner Brothers casting Martyn made so much sense visually. The man already looks unreal physically. Towering size, massive build, monster-like proportions. He naturally feels intimidating before speaking a single word. And honestly, that's exactly what Shao Kahn requires. The audience should feel uncomfortable the moment he appears on screen. Not because of jump scares, because of dominance. Now imagine his first full reveal in Mortal Kombat 2. Massive armor, dark throne room, Outworld soldiers kneeling in silence, and Shao Kahn standing above everyone like a living war machine. That moment alone could instantly define the tone of the entire movie. Because Shao Kahn changes the scale of Mortal Kombat completely. The first movie felt dangerous, but localized, personal. The sequel reportedly becomes apocalyptic. And Shao Kahn is the reason why. Now let's discuss why Shao Kahn works psychologically as a villain. Because, surprisingly, his simplicity is actually his strength. Modern movies often try making villains overly sympathetic or morally gray. Sometimes that works. But not always. Shao Kahn represents absolute tyranny. Fear without apology. Violence without guilt. And honestly, audiences occasionally crave villains who feel genuinely overwhelming again. Especially in fantasy storytelling. Because overwhelming villains create stronger heroes naturally. Now here's something fascinating about Shao Kahn. He doesn't just conquer worlds physically. He absorbs them culturally. That detail makes Outworld terrifying. Every conquered civilization leaves scars behind. Ruins, weapons, architecture. Creatures. Outworld becomes a graveyard of destroyed histories. And according to production discussions, Mortal Kombat II expands Outworld dramatically compared to the first film. That expansion matters enormously, because the environment itself tells the audience who Shao Kahn truly is. Now imagine walking through Outworld. Gigantic statues celebrating conquest. Burned kingdoms. Slave armies. Dark skies. Everything designed to remind citizens resistance is hopeless. That's psychological warfare. And Shao Kahn thrives on hopelessness. Now let's discuss the emotional symbolism behind the Emperor. Because Shao Kahn secretly represents fear of losing freedom completely. That's why Earthrealm versus Outworld works emotionally. It's not merely fantasy warfare. It's freedom versus domination. Humanity versus control. And Shao Kahn exists as the physical embodiment of that control. Every realm he conquers loses identity slowly. That's horrifying. Now let's talk about his connection to Kitana. Because this relationship may become one of the sequel's darkest emotional storylines. For Kitana, Shao Kahn isn't simply an enemy emperor. He's the ruler who raised her. The authority figure shaping her entire worldview. That psychological manipulation adds enormous emotional complexity. Imagine discovering the person controlling your life built an empire through genocide and fear. That realization destroys identity itself. And according to theories surrounding Mortal Kombat II, the movie leans heavily into Kitana's internal conflict regarding Shao Kahn's rule. That's excellent storytelling, because emotional betrayal always hits harder than physical violence. Now let's discuss the visual design of Shao Kahn. Because fans care deeply about his appearance. The helmet, the hammer, the armor. Everything about the character feels iconic. And adapting that design into live action is difficult. Too realistic, and he loses fantasy presence. Too exaggerated, and audiences stop taking him seriously. Thankfully, Mortal Kombat II reportedly embraces darker fantasy visuals more confidently this time. Meaning Shao Kahn may finally look as mythological and terrifying as fans always imagined. Now let's talk about the hammer. Because honestly, that weapon is part of Shao Kahn's identity. The hammer represents force, finality, destruction. Unlike elegant fighters such as Kitana or Scorpion, Shao Kahn fights like a natural disaster. Heavy movements, massive impact. Pure brutality. And according to production reports, the sequel increases practical combat choreography significantly. That's exciting because physical action always makes giant villains feel more believable. Episode 10: The Battle That Will Decide Earthrealm's Fate. This is no longer preparation, no longer prophecy, no longer warning. The tournament has finally begun. 4 years, Earthrealm survived through fragile victories. One battle at a time. One warrior at a time. But now, everything changes. Because Mortal Kombat 2 is reportedly preparing to deliver the real tournament fans have waited decades to see in live action. Not training, not setup. Warriors entering the arena knowing entire worlds may die depending on the outcome. And standing above all of it is a single terrifying truth. If Earthrealm loses this time, there may never be another chance. Today, we're diving deep into everything surrounding the tournament storyline in Mortal Kombat 2. The hidden lore, the structure of the tournament, the role of Shao Kahn, the return of Scorpion, Johnny Cage's evolution, Liu Kang's destiny, the Earthrealm fighters, the darker tone, the action choreography, the expanded budget, the possible fatalities, the emotional symbolism behind Mortal Kombat itself, and why this sequel may finally become the definitive live-action adaptation fans waited decades to experience. Because this isn't simply a competition anymore. This is survival. Main intro. When the 2021 Mortal Kombat reboot released, many fans shared the same criticism. Where was the actual tournament? The movie introduced characters brilliantly in some areas. Scorpion vs. Sub-Zero became iconic almost instantly. The violence felt faithful. The darker tone surprised audiences positively. But the central tournament itself remained mostly absent. And honestly, that frustration made sense. The tournament is the heart of Mortal Kombat mythology. Without it, the franchise risks feeling incomplete emotionally. Thankfully, Mortal Kombat 2 appears ready to change that completely. Everything surrounding the sequel suggests the filmmakers listened carefully to fan reactions. Bigger scale, more iconic fighters, expanded mythology, and most importantly, the tournament finally taking center stage. Now let's discuss why the tournament matters so much emotionally. Because Mortal Kombat was never simply about random fighting. The tournament exists to prevent total war between realms. It's a system created to stop universal chaos. A final chance before invasion begins. That idea gives every battle enormous emotional stakes automatically. Each victory matters. Each death matters. And according to storyline theories, Mortal Kombat 2 fully embraces those consequences this time. Now imagine the atmosphere of the tournament arena. Ancient architecture, outworld warriors standing silently, Earthrealm fighters carrying fear behind confidence, Shao Kahn watching from above like a king waiting for execution. That environment alone creates tension before any fight even begins. And honestly, that tension is exactly what the first movie occasionally lacked. The sequel appears far more focused emotionally. Now let's talk about Liu Kang. Because if the tournament truly becomes central to the story, Liu Kang naturally becomes the emotional core of Earthrealm's resistance. In many ways, Liu Kang represents everything Shao Kahn hates. Hope, discipline, humanity refusing to surrender. And according to production discussions, Mortal Kombat 2 reportedly explores the pressure surrounding Liu Kang much more deeply. Because symbols carry enormous weight. Everyone expects Liu Kang to save Earthrealm. But what happens psychologically when entire worlds depend on one person? That fear could become one of the sequel's strongest emotional storylines. Now let's discuss Johnny Cage. Because Johnny may secretly become the audience's emotional perspective throughout the tournament. Unlike Liu Kang or Raiden, Johnny enters this world unprepared. He understands movie sets, not death arenas. That contrast makes him relatable instantly. And according to theories surrounding the sequel, Johnny's journey revolves around discovering the difference between performance and real courage. That's compelling storytelling. The fake action hero becoming a genuine warrior. Now imagine Johnny entering the tournament arena for the first time. The confidence disappearing slowly. The jokes becoming nervous defense mechanisms. The realization finally hitting him. People are truly going to die here. That emotional transition could become one of the film's strongest arcs easily. Now let's talk about Shao Kahn's role in the tournament. Because honestly, Shao Kahn changes the emotional scale of everything immediately. Shang Tsung manipulates. Shao Kahn dominates. He doesn't merely want victory. He wants submission. And according to everything currently known, Mortal Kombat II portrays Shao Kahn as far more physically intimidating and psychologically terrifying than previous live-action versions. That's important, because the tournament only feels meaningful if the villain genuinely feels unstoppable. Now imagine Shao Kahn observing Earthrealm fighters like prey. No fear, no doubt, just certainty. That emotional confidence creates incredible cinematic tension naturally. Now let's discuss Kitana. Because Kitana's role inside the tournament could become emotionally devastating. She belongs to Outworld. But emotionally, she increasingly questions it. That internal conflict matters enormously, especially when Earthrealm fighters begin showing her something unfamiliar. Compassion, freedom. Mortal Kombat II, 2026. Episode 11. The most feared warrior is coming back. Death could not stop him. Hell could not control him. And revenge only made him stronger. Scorpion is returning. But this time, he may be more dangerous than ever before. When audiences watched the 2021 Mortal Kombat movie, one thing became clear almost instantly. Scorpion wasn't just another character. He was the emotional soul of the film. The pain, the rage, the tragedy. Every scene involving Hanzo Hasashi carried real emotional weight. And now, Mortal Kombat II is preparing to continue that story on a much darker scale. Because revenge changes people. Especially when revenge drags a man through hell itself. Today, we're diving deep into everything surrounding Scorpion's return in Mortal Kombat II. The hidden storyline theories. The emotional evolution of Hanzo Hasashi. The connection to Sub-Zero. The possible rise of Noob Saibot. The production upgrades. The darker tone. The expanded mythology. The action choreography. The symbolism behind Scorpion's fire powers. The future of the franchise, and why Scorpion may become the most tragic character in the entire Mortal Kombat cinematic universe. Because sometimes, the deadliest warriors are not fighting enemies anymore. They're fighting themselves. Main intro. Very few gaming characters achieved the level of cultural recognition Scorpion has. Even people who never played Mortal Kombat recognize him instantly. The mask, the yellow armor, the chain spear, the legendary phrase, "Get over here." Scorpion became bigger than gaming itself. But what makes the character truly unforgettable isn't the violence. It's the tragedy underneath it. And that's exactly why the 2021 reboot succeeded with audiences emotionally. Instead of introducing Scorpion as simply a cool supernatural ninja, the movie introduced Hanzo Hasashi first. A husband, a father, a man with humanity before becoming a monster. That decision changed everything emotionally, because when Hanzo lost his family, audiences felt the pain directly, and when he transformed into Scorpion later, the revenge felt earned. Now Mortal Kombat II reportedly expands that emotional darkness even further. And honestly, that's the smartest direction possible. Because Scorpion should never feel emotionally simple. He's not a superhero. He's a broken soul consumed by grief. Now let's talk about Hiroyuki Sanada. Because honestly, his casting elevated the franchise immediately. Sanada carries emotional intensity naturally. Every movement feels meaningful. Every line feels heavy. And most importantly, he understands silent pain. That's crucial for Scorpion. The character speaks less than many others, meaning emotion must come through presence and body language instead of endless dialogue. And according to production reports, Sanada's role reportedly expands significantly in the sequel. That's excellent news, because audiences connected deeply with his performance in the first movie. Now let's discuss Scorpion's psychological state after the first film. Because here's the terrifying reality. Revenge did not heal him. Hanzo killed Sub-Zero. But his family remains dead. His life remains destroyed. His humanity remains scarred. That emotional emptiness may define much of his storyline moving forward. And honestly, that makes Scorpion far more interesting than simple revenge-driven characters. He achieved vengeance, but peace never came. Now imagine Scorpion returning in Mortal Kombat II carrying that emotional exhaustion. Not just rage anymore. Something darker. A soul trapped between humanity and hell permanently. That atmosphere could become incredibly powerful on screen, especially if the sequel leans harder into horror-inspired fantasy visuals. Now let's talk about the possibility of Noob Saibot. Because longtime Mortal Kombat fans know Bi-Han's story rarely ends with death. And according to fan theories, Mortal Kombat II may begin transforming the former Sub-Zero into Noob Saibot, a shadow creature born from corruption and death. If that happens, Scorpion's emotional nightmare becomes even worse. Why? Because now the man he hated no longer remains human at all. That changes the rivalry completely. Now it becomes something supernatural, almost demonic. And honestly, that direction could create some of the darkest scenes in the franchise's history. Now let's discuss symbolism. Because Scorpion's fire powers represent more than visual spectacle. Fire symbolizes emotional destruction, pain, anger, uncontrolled grief. Everything around Scorpion burns because internally, he is still burning too. That emotional symbolism makes the character surprisingly deep, especially compared to typical action heroes. Now compare that to Sub-Zero. Ice represents emotional suppression, coldness, detachment. Together, the rivalry becomes psychologically fascinating. One character explodes emotionally. The other freezes emotionally. Neither finds peace. That tragedy gives their conflict lasting power. Now let's talk about visual atmosphere. Because Mortal Kombat II reportedly becomes much darker and more cinematic than the first movie visually. More hell imagery, larger supernatural environments, ash-filled skies, more practical effects. And honestly, Scorpion benefits from that atmosphere enormously. His storyline should feel mythological, cursed, almost horror-like. Now imagine Scorpion emerging from flames inside a ruined battlefield during the tournament. Silence spreading across the arena. Outworld warriors backing away in fear. That's cinematic mythology. And Mortal Kombat works best when it fully embraces mythological emotion instead of trying too hard to feel realistic. Now let's discuss Scorpion's connection to Cole Young briefly. Because the first movie established Hanzo's bloodline continuing through Cole. Some fans criticized that storyline heavily. Others appreciated the emotional legacy aspect. But Mortal Kombat II reportedly shifts focus more toward established characters this time, which means Scorpion may become more independent emotionally instead of functioning mainly as a legacy figure. That's probably a smart decision. Episode 12. Death was only the beginning. Sub-Zero is dead. But in Mortal Kombat, death means nothing, especially for warriors consumed by darkness, because some souls do not rest after dying. They return changed, broken, corrupted. And according to some of the biggest theories surrounding Mortal Kombat II, Bi-Han may be preparing to return in his most terrifying form yet. Noob Saibot, a shadow born from hatred. A warrior stripped of humanity. A living nightmare created from death itself. For longtime Mortal Kombat fans, that name carries enormous weight, because Noob Saibot isn't simply another villain. He represents what happens when pain and corruption completely erase the person underneath. And honestly, if Mortal Kombat II truly introduces him, the franchise may enter its darkest era yet. Today, we're diving deep into everything surrounding the possible transformation of Bi-Han into Noob Saibot, the hidden lore, the symbolism behind the character, the connection to Scorpion, the role of Quan Chi theories, the psychological horror elements, the visual possibilities, the expanded budget, the future of the cinematic universe, the emotional tragedy behind Bi-Han's fall, and why Noob Saibot could become the most terrifying character in Mortal Kombat history. Because sometimes, death doesn't end suffering, it evolves it. Main intro. When the 2021 Mortal Kombat reboot introduced Sub-Zero, audiences immediately understood one thing. This version was dangerous. Not loud. Not theatrical. Dangerous. Joe Taslim's performance transformed Bi-Han into a calm predator. Every movement felt controlled. Every scene carried tension. And unlike many modern action villains, he barely needed dialogue to feel threatening. That silence made him terrifying. But despite how powerful he appeared, Bi-Han died at the end of the movie during Scorpion's revenge. At least, that's what casual audiences believed. Longtime Mortal Kombat fans knew better instantly. Because in Mortal Kombat mythology, Bi-Han's story truly begins after death. Now let's talk about Noob Saibot, because this character represents one of the darkest concepts in the entire franchise. A corrupted soul reborn through shadow and suffering. Noob Saibot is not simply evil Sub-Zero. He's emptiness, emotion stripped away completely, humanity replaced by darkness. And honestly, that psychological horror element makes him fascinating, especially in live action. Now imagine Mortal Kombat II slowly revealing signs that Bi-Han's death changed something unnatural. Shadows moving independently, whispers inside darkness, unexplained disappearances. That horror-inspired approach could make Noob Saibot genuinely frightening instead of simply cool-looking. And Mortal Kombat reportedly leans harder into darker fantasy atmosphere this time, which makes the timing perfect. Now let's discuss why Bi-Han's transformation matters emotionally. Because Noob Saibot only works if audiences remember the humanity underneath. That's what makes the character tragic. Bi-Han was already cold emotionally during life, but traces of humanity still existed. After death, those traces disappear. And according to fan theories, Mortal Kombat II may portray this transformation almost like spiritual corruption. A soul infected by darkness itself. That's terrifying. Now let's talk about Scorpion. Because honestly, Scorpion's connection to Noob Saibot could become one of the sequel's strongest emotional storylines. Why? Because Hanzo killed Bi-Han for revenge. But what if revenge created something even worse? That possibility changes everything psychologically. Suddenly, Scorpion cannot simply celebrate vengeance anymore. Now he must confront consequences. And honestly, that adds enormous depth to both characters. Now imagine Scorpion encountering Noob Saibot for the first time, not recognizing him fully at first, then slowly realizing the monster standing before him was once Sub-Zero. That moment alone could become one of the darkest scenes in the franchise, especially if the movie embraces silence and horror atmosphere properly. Now let's discuss visual design, because Noob Saibot's appearance matters enormously to fans. Black shadow armor, dark smoke effects, unnatural movement. Everything about the character should feel wrong emotionally. Unlike Scorpion's fire or Sub-Zero's ice, Noob Saibot's powers should feel unsettling, like reality itself breaking around him. And with the sequel reportedly receiving a larger budget, the visual possibilities become exciting. Shadow duplication, teleportation through darkness, smoke-like body movement. All of it could look incredible in live action if executed carefully. Now let's discuss Joe Taslim again, because one reason fans want Noob Saibot so badly is simple. Taslim's performance deserves continuation. His physical control and intimidating screen presence fit the character perfectly. And honestly, transforming him into Noob Saibot would allow the actor to evolve the performance instead of repeating the same villain role again. That's smart storytelling. Now imagine Bi-Han returning physically changed. Movements slower, more unnatural, voice distorted slightly, emotion almost completely erased. That transformation could feel genuinely disturbing, especially compared to his already cold personality in the first movie. Now let's talk about horror elements, because Noob Saibot works best when treated almost like a supernatural horror figure rather than a normal fighter. Dark corners, sudden appearances, shadow manipulation, psychological fear. And Mortal Kombat II reportedly leans more heavily into horror-inspired fantasy visuals overall, which benefits this character enormously. Now imagine Earthrealm fighters hearing rumors about a shadow warrior hunting people silently. No explanation, just fear spreading gradually. That atmosphere could make Noob Saibot unforgettable on screen. Now let's discuss Quan Chi theories, because longtime fans know Quan Chi often plays a major role in Bi-Han's corruption. And while the sequel may not introduce him fully yet, small hints could begin setting up Netherrealm mythology slowly. That would be extremely smart, because Mortal Kombat's supernatural lore becomes massive eventually. And Noob Saibot serves as the perfect bridge between martial arts fantasy and full horror mythology. Now let's discuss symbolism, because Noob Saibot represents something psychologically terrifying: loss of self.